Hello, everyone. Welcome to Rational Science, the only site on the internet that does physics rationally. Today, we're going to be looking. Everybody else does movement of concepts and so on. So that's not physics. Physics is how does the universe work? How does Mother Nature do her magic tricks? Especially all that invisible, intangible stuff that's out there, magnetism, gravity, and so on. You can't see it, you can't touch it, but somehow it works. Clockwork universe. Anyways, how does she do that? That's what physics is about, figuring that out. The visible stuff, the tangible stuff, we've already figured all those things out. Those are kid stuff from now, have been for a long time. But the intangible, invisible stuff, that's different. That has all the mathematicians going nuts. They just do equations. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about angle. What in the world is an angle? Well, it turns out that the mathematicians don't seem to know exactly what an angle is. Then we're going to look at our science critic, and he doesn't seem to know what a hypothesis is. He talks about testing a hypothesis. How in the world do you test a hypothesis? Well, we'll find out about that later. Anyways, then I'll open the floor for questions, people who ask questions or make comments since last time. But we're going to begin with our segment, our extinction segment. And by the way, yesterday I had a little discussion with the people at Infidels, small group of people, but they are, they're rationalists. They try to be as rational as possible. And we talked about extinction, and I mean, it's just a complex subject, very complex. You got to go through many aspects of it, and we covered quite a few of them. So if you're interested, there it is on my other channel, the Bill Gatey channel. Okay, but here we're going to start with extinction, as we usually do. And as you all know, there's this balloon war going on. Forget about nukes. That's kid stuff. Now we have all these balloons, these threatening balloons. And I don't know, maybe that starts the balloon war. They start throwing balloons at each other. I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work out. But all I can tell you, I think I figured it out, why the Chinese are sending balloons over to the West. Okay? And I think it's got to do with this, you have the U.S. blacklisting some Chinese companies that made parts for that balloon that flew over, the first one that flew over. And I think the Chinese are sending the balloons so that they can sell the West, the things to pinch them with, to pop them with, the pins. So if you're in the habit of buying pins, all you're doing is, you're supporting the war effort, the balloon war. Okay, so I think that's what Chinese are up to. They're trying to sell pins to the West, and so they sell these balloons so that they use them to pinch them. Great. Okay, but well, who knows? Maybe we'll figure out what those balloons are for. I got my worries about it because on the one hand, you say, well, why would they send balloons? I mean, we've got satellites that can make images of matchboxes on the floor, on the ground. And so I have no idea yet why they would send balloons, but I'm sure that in the next few days or few weeks, they're probably going to figure it out and have some theories, and we'll find out. We'll find out what that's all about, the balloon war. Okay. Anyways, but there's another type of war, maybe a little more conventional war, that might even lead to nuclear war, that's going on, not in Ukraine, but in the East, with China. And here you have a couple of headlines that puts it in the right perspective. One says that predicts the US dollar dominance will give way to a multipolar currency system as China's yuan gains influence. And, they're starting to do some transactions in yuans. And I guess some people like that in other parts of the world, right? Other than the United States. They like it because they believe that United States, if it has inflation, it can control its money supply, and that affects everybody else's who's pegged to the dollar. That's one issue. The other one is that the United States uses that as a pressure point for someone who doesn't behave the way the U.S. government wants. And some of these countries, they want to wean themselves, out of that. They want to be able to have a little more discretion in their monetary systems. And so I think that to some degree that's probably going to be true. I think the yuan is going to be eating a little bit into the dollar market, and maybe even the euro might eat into it as well. So we'll find out how that develops. But I think we might be headed towards a bipolar currency, two worlds. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. And there are other currencies out there like the BRICS and so on, so don't put it past them. Politicians are probably working in different parts of the world, are probably working to solve their own problems, and that might mean that they might have to wean themselves from the dollar. The other one is a little more, worrisome. Firewatch, is America going to war with China? And there is this possibility that there's going to be a war in the East. Some predict that it's going to be within 2 years. Okay, and the trigger point was very likely going to be Taiwan, right? Maybe there's going to be another flashpoint. Who knows? Maybe someone attacks a ship on the China seas. Some people claim it's should be international, and China claims it's theirs. It's their personal lake, and so we'll see what happens with that. Same thing happened hundreds of years ago between, the Ottoman Empire and together with the West. You had, different countries, Spain especially, and the Venetians. And they had these fleets, and they kind of all used the Mediterranean Sea. And the question was, who did that lake belong to? Did it belong to the Ottomans, to the Turks, or does the Mediterranean belong to the West? And so we've had a little bit of history on that issue, and we'll see what happens in China. Anyways, here's another bit of news that also puts in perspective what might happen in the coming months or years. Okay, and when we're saying months, there's only 12 months to a year, so we can say that in 24 months something might happen. That's 2 years. So yeah, you can talk in terms of months if you're talking about a war starting in 2 years. Okay, so nothing wrong with that. And it says, wake up call, top Republicans sound alarm over China's nuclear expansion. There were several articles on that from different sources. China surpasses U.S. in number of ICBM launchers. And the U.S. military says China now has more ICBM launchers than it does, but the U.S. still has nuclear edge. Okay? And so I guess the Chinese are using some of that money that they're getting from their sales of manufacturing products. They're using it for military purposes. And that's not good for anybody. I mean, it's probably good for the Chinese, but it's not even good for them, for anybody to stock up on ICBMs. I mean, are those ICBMs just there for threat, for MAD, mutual assured destruction, to prevent the other side from throwing them first or doing something along those lines? Or is it actually to use them at some point? You would think that every country has at some point used the weapons that it develops. But, when you talk about nuclear weapons, you're talking about, real weapons now. Okay, we're not talking about little pop gun there. And so, you got to think about that. If everybody's arming itself, you've got Russia and the United States, they're going to stop that START treaty. And so instead of starting it or stopping it, it's going to be the stop treaty. And who knows what that'll bring. And then you'll also have the possibility of bringing down satellites. Okay, you have killer satellites. So it's going to be a lot of fun if any of those weapons ever get used. If they're just for deterrent, well, okay, no problem. They just sit at a table, reach an agreement, we're all fine. But if they do a little more than that, then we better start believing in God for the first time if you're an atheist, right? Okay, and because of that, they've been putting that doomsday clock back and forth. You've got the UN chief, okay, and he says Secretary General Guterres said experts who surveyed the state of the world in 2023 set the doomsday clock at 90 seconds to midnight. Now, that doesn't mean that in 90 seconds, the world comes to an end. It's just, figurative, that they move that clock, that hand on the clock, closer or farther away from 12 noon, right? The closest ever to the global catastrophe. Okay, so we're as close as ever, a minute and a half away, whatever that means, right? I don't know if that represents months or God's 7 days. Maybe they were 1,000,000 years each. Who knows? He pointed to the war in Ukraine, right? Runaway climate catastrophe. I think that's nonsense. Rising nuclear threats. That's not nonsense. The widening gulf between the world's haves and have-nots. And I think there is an issue there, right, that you got to look at. And the epic geopolitical divisions. Okay, so yeah, there are divisions. The world is kind of cut in half now, or maybe in 3/3. You could say Russia, China, and the United States, unless you put China and Russia together. And I'm not sure that's 100%, if it is at all. It's like they shake hands, but they hold a knife behind their backs and are ready to stab each other. That's happened so many times. Remember, Russia and China were both communists at some point in time, and they were big enemies. You said, hold it, they've got the same communist ideals and so on. How come they're enemies? Well, because their ideals don't always match their interests. And so it doesn't always go one-to-one, okay? Anyways, these are some of the things that are moving the clock closer to 12 o'clock, which is doomsday. And of course, they forgot the most important one, and I'm not sure how many seconds we're away from 12 noon on that, and that is the global economic collapse. And you can see that's not even on the list. And I think the global economic collapse will probably, I can't put my hand in the fire for this, okay, but will probably precede any nuclear exchange. I mean, when the global economy collapses, they may not see any reason to hold back on the nukes, and they might start pressing the red buttons. That's one possibility. In other words, they'll hold off, use it only as deterrence, only until the point where the world economy collapses, nobody has anything to lose anymore, and then they say, oh, what the hell? Let's look at the fireworks. Maybe. That's one angle to this. Angle, that's what I'll be talking about today. Okay, here's another issue. America's 31 trillion debt is getting dangerous as yearly interest crosses 500 billion mark. Okay, just the yearly interest is 500 billion. Some countries don't even make a tenth of that. Their whole GDP is not 50 billion. And here you're talking about 10 times as much. And of course, that causes inflation, means that they have to produce more money. And you can see why some countries want to stay away from the dollar if they can help it, partly because of that trend that you see there. The dollar is, they're just producing money out of the little machine, and that devalues the dollar. And you say, well, what's the problem? We can continue doing that forever. Not quite. And the reason you can't do that forever is that devalues the salary, the real wages of the proletariat, of the working man, the person who depends on a salary or a wages. It devalues his money, and also on the money that the governments give out to lots of people who depend on government help to stay afloat. So you have this mass of people who are below the, you could say, in the poverty regime, in the poverty level. And the number came out the other day, 38% of Americans are in that level. That's a pretty big percentage. Almost 2/5 of the population is in the, you could say, poverty level, if that's what you want to call it, low income, okay, whatever that means. But more people from the middle classes, from the medium income, will be falling into that range if you keep producing money like they're producing it now with all this debt. Okay. And you can't just reset and say, okay, we're going to change the money, we're going to reset all this. You got to pay the debts. If you don't pay the debts, a lot of people will go under. A lot of companies will go under who loan money and who are expecting to have their money back. So you just can't say, well, we'll just wipe it off the books, we'll red ink it. It doesn't work that way. So you can't just change green money with brown money and say, let's continue rolling. No, it's got repercussions. And you just got to think about that a little bit and maybe do a little bit of research on that. But let me tell you, it's not as easy as just wiping it off the books, accounting books. Okay, just in case, here's one fellow at least who predicts there's going to be a major stock market crash in the coming months, maybe coming years. Talks about in the next few decades. I'm not sure it's going to happen in decades. I think it's going to be closer to months and years than to decades. That's my take on that. Just a gut feeling. And yeah, I think the global economy is headed to some kind of catastrophe, some crash. And not only the global economy, you can see, it could happen in the stock market. A lot of them are interrelated. Okay, and as I'll talk in a second here, a couple of people think that a lot of that is just collusion between governments. That they're all shaking hands in the background, keeping the sheeple, down at the bottom, in the dark, feeding them misinformation, etc. Of course, there's a lot of that. I'm not saying there's not, but for them to shake hands, I'm not so sure about that. That's where I don't go 100% with that. I don't think Russia, China are friends of the United States. I don't think that all these people are working in the background, reaching agreements in closed doors and say, oh, let's laugh at all those little ants below. They don't know what we're doing up here. I don't think that's happening. I think that the killing is real, in Ukraine and in other places as well where there's confrontation. But more than that, I think that they are really enemies, and I think their actions demonstrate that. The reality, you can see it in the fact that because of the Ukraine war, the United States has essentially taken over Europe, and Europe is now subservient to the United States in many ways, where they have to follow the directions that are coming out of Washington, right? And they have to play along. The alternative is not too good either. They might fall into the hands of Russia or have problems with Russia. And so they sided with the United States because they said, look, we have more or less the same philosophy. And those people over there, they don't. And so that's the state of the union, of the world union, right? Of how the world runs today. So I don't think there's an agreement behind closed doors. And part of the reason I think that is that everybody has interests. Every country has interests, and not all those interests are in the same direction. Okay, they collide, and so there has to be disagreement. Okay, and I'm a guy who believed for many years in the world government. I don't think that's ever going to happen. No way. There's not going to be a world empire where there's only one government. I don't think so. Not anymore. It was my goal a long time ago, when I was 20, when I didn't know, when I knew everything. Now I know nothing. Okay, and last issue here, Mr. Biden says, or made a comment there suggesting or insinuating that maybe after 10 years, the United States will also wean itself off of oil, or start weaning itself off of oil. And he received a lot of slack for that. A lot of, I guess, the experts, and lots of Republicans, of course, they started chipping on that issue, saying he's crazy. Energy is going to be required not only beyond 10 years, beyond the 2030s, but all the way to 2050. In fact, they're saying the consumption is going to increase, if anything. And so you figure it out. I think you cannot uh, imagine that we can live without, oil, energy, whatever you want to call it, the black gold, um, for a long time to come. Uh, I think the world economic collapse is going to find us still using lots of oil. That's my personal take on that. I don't think we're going to wean ourselves out of oil. And I'm not only saying the United States, all countries, they all depend to a great extent on this black gold, coming out of the ground. All them dinosaurs, actually more from the Carboniferous, and there were no dinosaurs then. Anyways, here's one visitor. He says the following. He says, the premise that humans will tear each other apart during a famine or other crisis is just an assumption. Yeah, okay, we have many historical examples, and what happened was complicated. People will calmly starve to death next to their neighbors and loved ones. Yeah, this is true. And a good example of that is the when Hitler invaded Russia, and they had a siege on Leningrad, the Leningrad siege. You had a population of over 2 million people, and they were trapped, and food started running out, and there were a lot of military there because of the whole big Russian army was there defending the city. But as far as I know, I mean, I don't know the details, but there were no stealing. I mean, in great numbers, right? Maybe there was a case here or there, just like in any city. But I mean, not everybody went out there and started stealing. Not everybody got out there and started killing. In fact, a lot of people cooperated. They went into the streets. They shoveled whatever they needed to shovel, like make trenches or whatever was needed, or even get rid of the dead bodies, or if the Germans bombed some of the houses, they would go and help people and so on. So there was a lot of that. But I want to distinguish that, right, where money was still useful from a world in which money collapses completely, disappears from people's minds because nobody accepts money, and so you can't get rid of money. Now you got a different situation because you can't go to the store, to the bakery, and buy bread. That disappears. That easy stuff that we have today, where we have these bills or even the phones or whatever, all this internet money, and it goes to someone and you buy something. That easy stuff that gets vanished completely out of our world. And what we have then is lack of food because no one produces or distributes food. You can't use your money, and now we have a different situation. And the question there is, are you just going to sit down, maybe with your family? Yeah. Will you sit down with all your neighbors? Will all your neighbors think the same way as you do? And again, I showed the other day, I'm not going to show that again, the Twilight Zone segment where this guy builds a little basement there. He's got a place where to hide in case the bombs are thrown. And all his neighbors who knew about it, they just try to break into his little castle there underneath the ground. So you have situations and situations. And I'm saying that when money disappears, you better not trust anyone. My 5 cents worth. Okay. Your point is that other humans are not necessarily loyal to you, so you should be loyal to them. Yeah, it's a question that if you went back to the Paleolithic when we were hunter-gatherers, humans didn't trust humans any more than a lion trusts another lion. And because the only animal a lion fears is another lion, a male lion, Why? Because he doesn't fear the cheetah or, I don't know, one of those dogs or smaller animal, whichever animal. He fears another lion because he's the king of the jungle, whether that's true or not, So just think about that. Your worst enemy is going to be another human. So you might say, well, I know these people across the street. I know the guy next door. That could be true, but people react very differently when under pressure, when they're in a different situation. So just keep that in mind. 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 years ago, nobody trusted anybody out there in the wild because there was no law. There was no one to protect you. You were your own protection. Okay? If the other guy was tougher than you were out of luck. You couldn't call the Marines. Okay? Anyways, but humans can be loyal to others in spite of crisis. Look out for number one is not as liberating as you might imagine. Yeah, it's not a question of liking it. And I'm not saying liberating. I'm saying that it's like a necessity. Okay? It's like you can't avoid it unless you want to be killed, and by your neighbor. And trust is in the eye of the beholder. If you believe that you should trust your neighbor, well, more power to you. Hopefully it helps you, But I'd be watching out when the global economy collapses. I wouldn't trust anybody. In fact, today, very few people know who their next door neighbors are. They don't even know the names of who lives next door sometimes. He might be a rapist or whatever, the guy next door, a killer, murderer. Maybe the law is looking for him. You don't know because very few people, I can't say very few people, but lots of people out there don't even know who their neighbors are. Okay, so keep all that in mind. Americans give, not lend, Israel billions of dollars every year, and it's none of our business. I think it's fair to say we paid and continue to pay for the right to criticize. Absolutely not. Okay, first of all, you're not an American. Okay, and I'm sorry to tell you this. Okay, you're not an American. You're a human being. You were brainwashed to believe you're an American. Okay, you were brainwashed to believe that you're a Russian. You're brainwashed to believe you're a Chinese. Okay, you're brainwashed since you're a kid to look at the flag, say the anthem, that kind of thing, and root for the colors. We're humans. That's all we are. That's objectively what we are. Nationalism, whether you're an American, is up here. Okay, Mother Nature doesn't know what you got inside your head. All she knows is that you're a human being. That's all you are objectively to her. Okay, so we say, oh, I'm going to defend my side against their side. Okay, and in this case, the fellow says, I don't like my money going to Israel. But the issue is, you're being taxed. You're confusing two issues here. Okay, let's get them straight. You're being taxed. You have to pay taxes because someone put a gun to your head. It's the government, and they have ways of making you believe in the way they do, okay, that you must pay your taxes. Pay taxes, and you will pay taxes all the way to till you die, okay? We know this. This is the way it is. So you pay taxes. Now, whether that money goes to help the children in Afghanistan or to help Israel, you don't have any say in that. You say, sure I do. No, you don't. You don't have any say in that, believe me. You have no say in it unless you are a representative, or a senator. Maybe then you have some say in it. But you, as a constituent, the guy who votes, you have no say in that whatsoever. Okay? And you might think you have power. You say, I'm going to get together with all these other people who think like me and say, my money doesn't go over there. It's going to go there if the Congress decides, which is a separate issue of you being taxed. These are two separate issues. You might say, hey, I voted for the Democrats or I voted for the Republicans because they would not help Israel. It turns out now these people are helping Israel, and I don't want my money going out there. Well, the answer is, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to go with a gun to Washington and force them not to give money out to whomever they want, to whoever the Congress decides to give money to? I mean, a lot of people don't like to give money to Ukraine. They say it's a black hole. You're just swallowing money. But the government's doing it. And so all those people who are against it, even if they were majority, if the government decides that it's in their best interest to help Ukraine because of maybe national security issues, these small ants that say, hey, I don't want my dollars going out there, they have no say in the matter. And it's got nothing to do with taxes. Taxes is what you pay because you're forced to pay. Decisions on where that money goes, that's with Congress. And just like anything else, you don't get to vote who goes to Congress. You get to, in other words, you don't elect. You vote for who is selected for you. Okay? Whomever is selected for you, that's whom you have to elect. Okay, you don't get to select. And I hope you understood that. So that's why, I get out of politics. Politics is just a bunch of baloney. But it took me many years to figure a lot of this stuff. Just don't get involved in politics unless you are a politician and you have some power. Then yeah, it's your career, no problem. And if you can make money on the side, do it as well. But to say that you, as just a measly old voter who casts a vote for a candidate and expects him to do what you want, think again. Okay, fellow says here, propaganda is as news. Yeah, there's a lot of that. In fact, here I can't get RT, the Russian channels. I just get the headlines, and I don't even know how I got that, but I can't read the news. And I would like to read the news myself. I would like to compare what they say on the other side compared to what they say on this side of this dividing line, Ukraine war, for example. And I don't get to do that because someone does it for me. They say, we're not going to let you listen to this side. Oh, okay. Called freedom of the press, right? So yeah, there's a lot of propaganda as news. Okay, the war in Ukraine is one example. Israel, United States is a pro-Israel country, pro-Israel, that favors Israel. Because in a way, Israel is the fifth column of the United States. It's just another star in the flag. Okay, there's more than just a love affair there. Okay, so Israel would not be as powerful today if it didn't have all the help from the United States. And so I hope you can figure that out after 1948. That's when Israel became a country. And if you go back to, 1917, 1919, I think it was. That I talked about the other day, you've got the creation of the Israel state, of Jews going into Israel and eventually becoming a country and pushing the Arabs further and further out. All that was pushed by the West, primarily by the United States. So, the West is very pro-Israel, and that's just a fact of life. Okay, so you have to accept it, whether you like it or not. Okay, that's why don't get involved in politics, because you might say, but look, they're killing Palestinians or whatever. It doesn't affect you. I'm sorry, it doesn't affect you. Go fishing, get a beer, have a good time, go with family, then you'll enjoy yourself. If you think about what's going on in other parts of the world, your mind is over there, you're not paying attention to what's going around you. Think of it that way. Same with the LGBTQ, the alphabet people, that propaganda is going all over the place. It's propaganda as news. So he's right about that. There's a lot of that going on. Indoctrination as education. Yeah. Especially nationalism, like I said. Nationalism, we're all indoctrinated in nationalism since we are kids. Okay, so that's one of the biggest. Also, we have religion, but I think one of the biggest religions is nationalism. Man, that's ingrained in everybody. They feed it to you since you're a kid, and you can't get rid of that so easily. You can't be neutral. Okay, and it's very hard for people to wean themselves out of nationalism. Mind control is entertainment. Yeah, there's a lot of games. You have all these kids, getting all their information from TikTok and so on. Kids are hooked on that today. So I'm not sure if you can talk about mind control, but there is an element of a herd mentality out there with this issue. And if you can call that mind control, I guess that's mind control. Okay. This fellow says an all nuclear war exchange is impossible. I don't know why he says that it's impossible. Nuclear exchange is totally possible. Everybody presses the red buttons and we're done. So possible it is. Probable, that's a separate issue. Whether they actually will press those red buttons, that's a different issue. But possible, it's 100% possible. It's just not 100% probable. In fact, before the collapse of the global economy, it's probably improbable. That's the way I look at it. But again, you never know. The state of mind of some of the heads of state, okay? And governments are working together in keeping their populations under control through fear. Yeah, I don't think their governments are working together. I don't think Russia works together with the United States at the at the root level. There is some level of cooperation here and there, simply because of self-interest. So they reach agreements. They do shake hands in private. You know, they reach some kind of treaty or whatever. They sign treaties. But to say that they're all in cahoots and collusion, where they say, hey, you tell your people this, we'll tell our people that. To some degree, that's true, but not completely the way I think this fellow's proposing. That they're all in such collusion that all the rich people are saying, hey, we're all in the same club, whereas all the poor people are in a different club. I think there is animosity. I think there is a state of war between the East and the West. Okay, I don't think that's fake. Okay, so but that's my personal take on that. You take my 5 cents worth for what you think it is worth it. Okay. One more comment for another visitor. He said, "I research those who create conspiracy-based videos trying to debunk nukes." Aha. There are many hours of gathered evidence to the stories, and some of them will make you question things as they so obviously fake some things. Okay, just like some of the moon footage. Okay, I don't know about that. Maybe there is some. I don't think it's fake moon footage. I think sometimes they put in there things that they did in the lab. They took pictures of that or filmed something there, and they would put that maybe in official capacity, maybe because it looks better than the film that they filmed out there. And so people say, oh, I got you there. You put something that's fake. Yeah, it is fake because it just looks better, and it served no purpose to put the real thing, which has less quality. Maybe something like that happened. I won't put that past them. But to say that humans did not land on the moon, that's a separate issue. That's got to be analyzed to a different degree. And my take on that is that um, if, if you cannot show me, okay, that whatever they could do on the moon, they could do in Hollywood and vice versa, then you don't have a case. You have to show me that there's something that they did one place that they couldn't do in the other. Okay, but if everything on the moon could be done in Hollywood, you haven't said anything. You don't have an argument. Okay, because that means that you have no way of distinguishing the real thing from the fake one. If everything that they did on the moon could be done in Hollywood, we have no way of distinguishing between those. Okay, and so, and the funny part is that, people who say that or who argue that, have that argument, then they go in there and they say, oh, but the shadows are wrong. Oh, the stars in the background are not there. Well, they made so many errors in Hollywood. These guys didn't know that the, Roman gladiator had a Rolex watch. You take that scene out. And so why didn't they take all these scenes out that, that all these people who scrutinize those movies say, there's an error, there's another error. They find so many errors, you say, well, who did these films? So no, all I can tell you is you got to be able to distinguish between Hollywood and the moon. If you can't do that, you don't have a case. Okay, so that's where you got to. It's not the other way around, like saying, oh, but they could have done that in Hollywood. Yeah, if they could have done it in Hollywood, you don't have a case, because that means that they did it all in Hollywood, and they could have done it in real life out there in the moon. And if you can't tell me what the difference is, then you don't have a case. That's an invalid argument. Okay, so let's think about that. Anyway, it says, the so-called nuclear blast that sideswipes the buildings and decimates them, yet everyone fails to notice camera taking the shots, doesn't even shudder once from the ground tremors. Well, we're talking about something that's very far away. Okay, it's not like the guys there, stuck to the ground zero. The guy's far away. If you look at the blast in Alamogordo there in New Mexico, they were far away. They saw this from very far away. They had an idea of more or less what was going to happen. So they weren't just standing there next to it. They also used some special glasses. It's not like they were staring directly at the flash. So keep all these things in mind. They are far away. And how much of that vibrates the ground? Well, that's something you got to look at. Is this like an earthquake where it's underneath your feet, or an earthquake when you're a few miles away? You know, will you feel the tremors? Okay, and I've been through three earthquakes in California. We had them over there in Sunnyvale, where I work, and the ground shook. Yeah, I know what an earthquake looks like now. Three of them I went through. A blast of that magnitude has supposedly been reported to set off small earthquakes. Yeah, small earthquake. Yeah, it depends on how far away you are. So, you know, I'm not sure you said much there. Unless you can tell me exactly how far away you were or how far away you should be from a nuclear blast. And if you put the camera there with a focusing lens, you know, you can film that without having too many tremors, especially if you're in some kind of platform that, you know, protects against vibrations. So think about all that. Okay, let's move on to our segment of physics. And today we're going to look at angle. What is an angle? You know, I thought I knew, but it turns out that, well, I probably know, but I don't think the mathematicians know. And we'll see some differences here. So let's start with our version. This is it. Okay, I talked about the universal movie. Universal movie is a tool that we use so that every frame in that film, in the universal movie, simply shows all objects in the universe, every single atom at a given distance from each other. It's just separation, qualitative separation. And everything is standing still in each frame. So in order to see the universe move, just tiny amounts, you know, from one location to the next, but very, you know, very tiny amounts in the location, you need to look at 2 frames or more. And 2 frames or more is what we call motion. And the concepts that you see at the bottom there, motion, position, plasma, ether, etc., all those are dynamic concepts. You need at least 2 frames in a universal movie to conceptualize anything that involves motion. On the other hand, static concepts, as the ones you see at the top, the ones in yellow there and blue, those you can see in a single frame, or you can conceptualize in a single frame. And there you see some object, distance, location, existence. Those are all static concepts. You do not have to see anything moving in order to conceptualize those words. And one of them is line. As you can see there, you see a line, which is an object, okay? And what you're staring at is an elongated rectangle. That's what's objectively in front of you. Okay, so what you're looking at, something standing still. It's an object. It's an object because it has shape. That's the reason it's an object. It looks like a 2-dimensional, could be 3, but at least it's got 2 dimensions, right? It's got width and height. Okay, there's no length. Length would be the 3rd dimension on that. Okay, at least we don't see it there. And what you see is an elongated rectangle. It's got 4 edges, okay, etc., etc. So that's what a line is, objectively. That's what's in front of you. It's not 1D, it's 2D, okay? And it's an elongated rectangle, which is what 2D is. What you have there is a plane. That's objectively what is in front of you. Okay, that's the starting point. Okay, I hope you understood what I just said. One fellow says, he goes through the motions of trying to debunk those ideas. And here's the first notion he puts out. He says, a line is a straight path on a plane that extends forever in both directions with no endpoints. A line segment is part of a line. So a line is one thing, a line segment is something else. It's a part of a line, a segment of a line, right? That has 2 endpoints and is finite in length. Okay, I hope that makes sense to some of you, okay? A ray is a line segment that extends indefinitely in one direction. These are conceptual one-dimensional geometries, meaning that they can only reside in the mind or minds of humans as abstract ideas. Okay? These geometries then can only be represented with illustrations. Okay, so this is his argument. saying that's what a line is. The line is not what I showed you just now, which is an elongated two-dimensional rectangle. Okay, he's saying something else. And so let's go piece by piece to see what this fellow said. Okay, so see if we can detect all the errors he made, every single one that he made with his description or identification of what a line is. Okay, here it is. Let's go with the first one. He says, a line is a straight path. Well, a path is not a figure. You know, a path, like there you have a plane path, right? Path made by a plane. This one's crooked, it's not straight, okay? But if a path is not a figure, it doesn't even belong in geometry, okay? So a path is a noun in ordinary speech, and it's approximately or something similar to a hole. You need, in order to have a path, you need some ground, for example, right? You need to have something on which you make the path. Just like when you make a hole, you need to have the ground to make the hole into. Not like in mathematics, you know, mathematical physics, where they have these black holes and they drill them into space, and they're zero-dimensional, zero-dimensional holes. So you figure that one out. And so this path, which is a verb actually, right, is an itinerary, a trajectory or orbit. In case of orbit, it would be circular, not straight, right? But then you cannot talk about straight. You cannot use the adjective straight to qualify a path, because a path is not a thing, it's a verb, okay, as he used it there. Can it extend forever? Well, then it's not a figure. Again, no figure extends forever, because a figure is that which has shape. Okay, so not only doesn't it belong in geometry, but if it extends forever, it's not a figure, period. And verbs don't extend. So if path is a verb, then you cannot talk about extending it like you would extend a clothesline. Okay, extends forever. Again, he's talking about an itinerary. He's talking about motion. There is no object that extends forever. Whenever you talk about forever, meaning time, eternal, right, or use any of those qualifiers, you're talking about not extending. You're talking about something different. You're saying that the itinerary is never ending. It's you know, it just goes on and on. You could say forever, right? You're talking about motion. You're talking about perpetual motion, and not about a physical object. And no endpoints, again, not a figure. So all those he failed, and that's just in his first sentence. Okay, so there he had trouble qualifying what a line is, okay, because he fails all those points. Not a geometry, not a figure, it's a verb, and there's no verb that extends, and there's no object that extends forever. So he failed all those. But he continues here, he goes on the second line, said a line segment is part of a line. Well, we just held that a line is not a figure, so what is it? Part of an itinerary, I guess. That's what he's saying, okay? That has two endpoints and is finite in length. Well, we got a problem with that because, you know, if it's got two endpoints, you could say it's a line, but if it's just a segment of a line and a line is an itinerary, all you're talking about is two locations. Those endpoints are locations, and what you have in between are more locations. You're talking about an itinerary. So this line segment is actually a verb that he's conceptualizing there. And it's finite in length, he says, you know, and again, verbs are not finite. Okay, motion is not finite. All motion is infinite if you use that term, not correct, adjective. You can say all verbs are incessant. Every motion is incessant, okay? And verbs don't have endpoints. So again, all those issues he failed in describing what a line is. Okay, so he's got the wrong notions of what is objectively in front of you. Okay, and here's another one that says a ray is a line segment that extends indefinitely in one direction. Well, we have a problem because he already defined line segment as one that has two endpoints. So now he's saying, well, it's a line segment that is missing one endpoint. What was a line segment? An itinerary. because it's a line, and a line is an itinerary. So the line is not a figure, which means a line segment is not a figure, which means an array is not a figure. We're talking about verbs here. Okay? Line segment is equal to two endpoints. In other words, that line segment can't be extended indefinitely. Okay? So again, he's got all these errors in conceptualizing what a line is. It's easy to tear all his arguments down. Okay? And then he moves on to the next issue, which is the conceptual issue. He says, these are conceptual, one-dimensional geometries, meaning that they can only reside in the mind or minds of humans as abstract ideas. But we have a problem because a concept is not an object. Okay, so if he's going to talk about figures, there's no such thing as a 1D figure. And if it's a 1D figure, it doesn't belong in geometry. Okay? You can't illustrate the 1D. So he's talking about, geometries can only be represented with illustration. Yeah, geometries can, but not the 1D line. You cannot illustrate a 1D line. Whatever you put on the paper is at least 2D, two-dimensional. An idea is a concept, is a synonym of the word concept. So they're synonyms. And so idea is not a figure. And again, that means that it doesn't belong in geometry. So he made all these errors in just a couple sentences there. Very interesting, because he just about failed every single one. All I can ask him is that he do a little bit of research and get the basics of geometry, because apparently he lacks an understanding of geometry, basics of physics also, right? Here's the correct definition, okay, which I'll put up again. What are you staring at? I mean, objectively. Well, you see an elongated rectangle, and that rectangle is straight. You can talk about straight, you can qualify it as straight because you use the adjectives to qualify nouns. A line is a noun because it has shape, and for the purposes of physics, purposes of science. Okay, that object there is an elongated rectangle. It's got four sides, two-dimensional. Those sides have edges, so it's got four edges. It's got width and height, okay? And you can say it's straight because objects can be said to be straight. You can qualify them with that adjective. What else? If it's straight, it's continuous. Continuous means it's made out of a single piece, not made of parts, okay? And in contrast, and it's finite. In contrast, the line of mathematics, which is what this fellow apparently was trying to describe or define, right? Is an infinite line, meaning it's not an object, it's not a thing. It's 1D, which again, it's not a thing. You can't illustrate a 1D. What they're talking about is an itinerary. They're talking about made of points, meaning locations. What is made of locations? Motion. Two or more locations makes motion. Okay, so you can see that, especially if you got the infinite signs there, the negative to positive infinity, they're not talking about a physical object. They're not talking about a geometry, a figure. So that's a line. A line is what you see there. Objectively, that's what's in front of you. Now, if in your mind they force you to say, well, yeah, that's what's there in front of you, but think of it as a 1D line. Well, now you're being subjective. Now you're not talking about what's objectively in front of you, what's coming out of the screen to your eyes. Now you're interpreting that and saying, okay, I'm going to imagine that's a 1D line. But you cannot even imagine a 1D line because there is no such figure in geometry, okay? That's why they never that's why they can't define the point, the 0D point and the 1D line, because they're not points and they're not lines. They're talking about locations and they're talking about motion. And they call that geometry. So our forefathers, the Greeks, they screwed up from the start. And I'm sure there were people before them where they got a lot of this understanding of geometry, measurement of the land. Okay, so now you know what a line is. Why do we need the line? Well, because we're going to talk about angles. We're going to say, well, how does the line relate to an angle? Does an angle require lines? So that's going to be the issue, right? Remember, what is a line? Just an elongated rectangle in physics, in science. That's what's objectively in front of us, and we look at it objectively. No subjectivity whatsoever, no interpretation. In math, they do something else. They look at that and say, well, you're not staring at a 2D line. You're actually staring at a 1D line, meaning made of points, meaning that it's locations that form motion. That's what they're talking about. Okay, and that's an interpretation. That's subjective. Okay, and that's where the problem comes, because what you're staring at is not what they're describing. There's a, they don't match. Okay? There's a disconnection there. Okay, so here we bring the universal movie again. Okay, and so for us it's very simple. What is an angle? Well, you have two lines, okay, and you have a separation between them. See how easy it was? That's what an angle is. They're connected at one point and not at the other. Okay, so that's an angle. Problems come when they have zero-dimensional angles. Okay, and that's one of the problems, because you have the zero-dimensional angle, and they say that's an angle. It's a zero-dimensional angle. Well, not if you define it as connected at one end and not at the other. Then they can't be zero-dimensional. Okay? So just keep that in mind. But it's a static concept, because we're looking at the end result, not at how we got there. And that's where you're going to see the difference. Okay? Not how we got there, but the end result. A static concept, what's coming out of the screen to your eyes, that doesn't move. It's in a single frame of the universal movie. What do you see? You see two lines that are separated. Lines are physical objects. You can describe them as being straight, okay, because you can use the adjective such as straight to qualify a line, a geometric line. And what you're seeing, that separation, we call that an angle. Okay, we don't need to know by how much, by how many. We don't need to measure. We don't need to use the word degrees. We don't need any of that. In fact, if you go to another planet, maybe they have a different notion of degrees. Maybe they don't use the 360 for a circle. They don't use 90 for a perpendicular. Maybe they don't use any of that. Maybe they have other numbers for those same relations. Okay, so let's look at what an angle is for these people. Okay, and here's the unimaginable mathematical so-called physics angle. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at now. What is an angle? Well, it's a quantitative concept. It's how much. That's what they're interested in. They're not interested in the qualitative aspect of this. They're just interested in the quantitative. How much? How much wide is the mouth of the alligator? That's what they want to look at. And it's got to do with measurement, numbers, units, degrees in this case. Could be radians, some other measure that you can come up with. Angle, two 1D lines. What was a line in mathematics? Motion. So you're saying that you need two itineraries, two trajectories, straight itineraries, right? To make an angle, according to mathematical physics, so-called physics. Okay? Straight, I don't know about straight, because itineraries cannot be straight. You can say that a ruler is straight, okay? Or the table is straight. You cannot say that you walk straight. The word is rectilinearly. I walk rectilinearly. Then you can use the word, this adverb, to qualify a verb. But you can't say that walking is straight. Not in physics. In ordinary speech, you can say whatever you want. That's poetry. That's good. That's hyperbole. You can use whatever you want there. But in physics, in science, you have to use the correct language. That's what we're trying to teach here, the correct language. And you can't say you walk straight. You walk rectilinearly. That's the way you say it in science. Okay, let's get that straight. Okay, and there you have the mathematical line. It's a rectilinear itinerary. So to form an angle, they use two trajectories, two itineraries. Okay. And really, you should represent those with dotted lines. They never do. What they have is these solid lines, which is wrong. Because if they're going to talk about itineraries, what they're doing is putting one itinerary at an angle with respect to another itinerary. Okay, so they're talking about two itineraries. And is that an angle? Or do we need two objects to create this pattern Okay? Because remember, when you have motion, the only way you can reproduce that if you remember the previous locations. Otherwise, you don't know if you walk, right, straight, and another person walks straight in a different direction, right? You formed an angle between the two of you. But see, the problem is that you're just at the end points. You have location only at one place. You can't be at two places at once, like in quantum mechanics. Okay? So you're here in one place, the other guy's over there at another place, and the only way you can remember, that you have an angle is by tracing all the locations back to square one, to where you both, from where you both parted. Okay, so again, when you talk about itinerary, you only end up at one location finally. And the only way you're going to get back is if you trace a line through all those locations and unite the two at a corner, the two itineraries at one corner. So that's the notion that they have in mathematics. Okay, and even worse, because they have one of these trajectories, it rotates, it opens up. So we have not only two trajectories, you're moving along these paths, as this fellow called it, and then the trajectories are widening out and they're looking at that separation. So we have an itinerary that is moving and forming what? An angle, because that's what the line is. It's an itinerary. It's not a line. It's not a rectangle, an elongated rectangle. It's a bunch of locations. And once you build this location, this set of locations, now you're going to widen that. You're going to fan it out to form your angle. So you have a whole bunch of locations. You got to finish that line first, right? That itinerary. And now you're going to move the whole itinerary. You're moving motion to form the angle. That's the notion they have in mathematical physics. Okay, I hope that someone got that. So yeah, an angle is rotation of a trajectory, rotational trajectory of rectilinear trajectories. That's what it is. You're rotating the trajectory or the itinerary. Okay, and of course they're interested in degrees or radians or whatever. And those are measurements, those are units, and those have to do with numbers, with how many units of, you create a number or a unit, and then you say so many units is what this moved over. And so they're talking about motion, how much something rotated, not about the end result. The degrees is a measure of motion. Of motion of what? Of an itinerary. So I hope you got all that. What are some of the problems that this creates, these notions, these concepts that these people have of what an angle is? Well, here, let me give you a couple examples here. Here's the first one. Mathematical physics, perpendicular. What is perpendicular? Well, we say it's an angle. Okay. Again, perpendicular is a quantitative concept in mathematical physics and invokes two directions. Remember, but here you're talking about, again, motion, okay? The direction in mathematical physics is not a static concept. It's motion in a given direction. And so we have directions that are moving now, okay? So keep all that in mind. But direction is a qualitative concept. I mean, it doesn't even belong in math, okay? So you have no use for direction in math. I can't put a direction in an equation. Okay, they do through velocity, because velocity has magnitude and direction. Okay, but the direction part is the qualitative part, and they kind of put it in by hand. Acceleration, if you change direction, like in angular momentum or angular rotation, you accelerate. Even though the speed remains constant, you accelerate simply by changing direction. A qualitative concept that changes your acceleration, which is a quantitative concept. Okay? Keep all this in mind. So math direction is a dynamic concept. Okay? And this implies that mathematical physics, the notion of perpendicular, is also a dynamic concept. So they're not talking about the final result for perpendicular, which is like that. they're saying that they're moving the stick that they put to represent direction, motion, right? Itinerary. They're moving it, and that motion is the 90-degree angle. Okay, they have to put a number to that. And so you can see they always represent it with arrows. Okay, so here you see a comparison side by side. Okay, the physics perpendicular, okay, it's perpendicular is qualitative. It's a static concept. Okay, we don't need to have anything moving. Perpendicular is something you see in a single frame of the universal movie. Perpendicular invokes the edges of two straight ideal figures. There you see the picture of the blue versus the red line. And a vertical figure versus a horizontal figure. That's what it is. That's a definition of perpendicular. The word perpendicular comes from the plumb bob that the masons used to use in the old days, and they would put the plumb bob to measure it against the horizon. Okay, so they would build a wall and they wanted to see if it was straight. Say they would hang something, a weight, from a string, and they would measure, check to see if the wall was straight. It was all qualitative. There was no 90-degree for that purpose. All they said is it's perpendicular. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, it's one is straight, one is vertical compared to the other one, which is horizontal. That's what they meant, and that's what it is. That's what it is for the purposes of physics, and that's what it is objectively in front of you. Okay, this other stuff that's on the left, the mathematical notion, 90 degrees, all that, that's for calculations that these people want to do to play around. You know, but then they come up with idiotic, absolutely idiotic conclusions, such that gravity is geometry. What do you mean geometry? Yes, the warping of this platform, which are a bunch of dimensions, which are a bunch of number lines actually, and we bend them. And it's the bending of space time, right? Just this coordinate system that bends, and that's gravity. So you can see that it does have an effect on the minds of all these mathematicians who extrapolate the notions of geometry that they've created to reach conclusions, irrational conclusions that, you know, rational people out there have problems swallowing. They say, what do you mean space-time? What is space-time? Well, we don't know. It's unimaginable because it's four-dimensional. Oh, it's like a four-dimensional object? Yeah, it is. Space and time. Time is a physical object. Well, you don't have to take it so literally. Those are the answers you get. And so, yeah, all these geometric figures, they come from these lines and points, which were misdefined from the start. And today, if you look those words up, they say, well, we can't really define these words. Yeah, they can't, because they're trying to define an object, and you don't define objects. You don't define the word table. You don't define the word rock, the word tree in science. You point and say tree, rock, table. Then you can describe it, but you didn't need to describe it to point and name it. You can't do that with a concept. Concept you must define. Rocks, trees, tables, you don't define. You just point and name. And so that's the difference. Okay? Objects you point to and name, and concepts you define. Okay, here's the wrap up on that. Here you have the mathematical physics dimension. What is a dimension? Well, according to mathematical physics, okay, this is the mathematics version, the minimum number of coordinates needed to specify any point within it. And see, they use these words like point and coordinates, and you say, oh, what was all that? Well, coordinate is a number. That's all it is. You look up the word coordinate and say it's just a number. So it ends up being a dimension is just a minimum number of numbers. Okay? And then they say any point, meaning a location, not a point. They use the word point, and that's very misleading because you don't know if they're talking about a dot or location. And they're talking about location. They're not talking about a point. Therefore, point is not part of geometry. Location is what they're referring to, and location is not a geometric figure, especially if it's alleged to be 0D, which it ain't, because you have what they have is like an ordered pair or ordered triplet. How to get to that location, the instructions on how to get there. That's what a point is. The instructions on how to get there, not what it is. It's not the location itself, it's how to get there. Instructions on how to find the treasure chest. Okay, so we have the number of numbers, and what is a number? It's to count. It's the verb to count. That's what a number is. Okay, and so I'll let you think about that for a long while, but that's what the word number is. It's not a noun for the purposes of science. It's a noun in ordinary speech, but not in science. In science, it's the verb to count. That's what counting, that's what number is, counting. Okay, and so dimension, coordinate, vectors, they're all dynamic concepts. And they all have magnitude and direction. They say vectors have, but they're all the same. All three are magnitude and direction because they're talking about number lines. And number lines have magnitude, but they don't have direction, actually. Only physical things can have direction. Okay? And number lines have no direction in great measure because numbers can go in any direction you want. You can go that way, that way, that way. I mean, look at a number line called time. Which direction does time flow or run or whatever they say? Whatever word they use to qualify that. No, time doesn't run or flow in any direction because time is not moving. It's not a thing that moves in any direction. You can say the cow moved in that direction. You can't say time moved in that direction. And time is a number line. It only has magnitude. It has no direction. Direction is a qualitative concept, belongs exclusively to physics, not at all to mathematics. Okay, so what are all these dimensions, coordinates, and vectors? They're rectilinear trajectories. In fact, you see there, that's a typical graph for Cartesian coordinates. And you can see they put arrows and they're all chopped into pieces. Because what they're really representing with those lines cut into segments, you know, what they're representing is locations, numbers. Each one is identified with one number. And you can break those numbers up in gazillions of pieces, no problem, you know, depending on your coordinate system or how you're going to use it. You can chop that up as many times as you want because they're not talking about direction. Direction you cannot chop into pieces. Direction is always like that. It's made of a single piece. And what they do, they chop direction into pieces because they're talking about what motion, and each one of those pieces is location. And each one is assigned a number so that you have this coordinate system. And that's why they put arrows, and that's why they chop the arrow, that long arrow, they chop it into pieces. Okay, so you got that. That's what they're putting in front of your eyes. And then they start giving you all this you know, this word wizardry in your ears that you're listening to, and you say, well, I can't make sense of what they're putting there and what this guy is explaining. Of course not. You're never going to make heads or tails or mathematics in that sense because mathematics has nothing to do with physics. What you're looking at is a physical thing that's hitting your eyes, that's objectively coming into your eyes, and they're asking you to interpret it in a given way, which is not what you have in front of you. What you have in front of you is motion. Each one of those segments is location. You build motion with locations, just like we do in our universal movie. It's got an arrow. That arrow is not a static direction. It's motion, direction of motion. And you have to walk, like in this case, example, you have to walk 2 paces to the right and 3 paces north, and you get to the point, which is a location, which is where you're at, where the treasure chest is at. Okay? And again, itineraries are rotated 90 degrees. So they rotated 90 degrees. Remember, those are itineraries, and they're to get their perpendiculars, their dimensions, because dimensions are orthogonal to each other. Okay? Length, width, and height are perpendicular to each other. And so they rotate them, because what they're talking about is not dimensions like length, width, and height. They're talking about number lines made of locations, each one with a number assigned to it, and they're rotating these to the 90-degree angle, to the perpendicular angle, meaning vertical versus horizontal. That's what it's all about. Okay? Okay, let's go with our science critic. And he surprised me. He talks about testing the hypothesis. I have no idea what he's talking about. What do you mean testing the hypothesis? Okay, so let's see. And he also says that because, you know, we have our proposal, which is the rope hypothesis. which is more or less looks like this. We're saying this is what's between any two atoms. My fists are the atoms here. And we're saying this is what the basic system is out there. Two atoms bound by a pair of twine threads. And they're bound because the same threads build the atoms. So everything's a single thread in the universe. Okay, that's the hypothesis. That's our proposal, our assumption. That's our starting point, so that people can follow the train of thought. And it turns out this fellow says, how does he test the hypothesis? How is he going to test his rope hypothesis? So let's listen to him first. Here, let me put him on. Oh, sorry. Here it is. Here it goes.
The issue to be addressed in this rebuttal is, what can it possibly mean to test a hypothesis?
Notice how he just brushed over the testable part, which is a very big part of science, testing your hypotheses. I wonder if Bill has ever tested his silly string hypothesis, or if it can even be tested.
Okay, so he wants to test the hypothesis, whatever that means, and then he wants to say, well, Bill, how do you test your rope hypothesis? How do we test that one? How do we, prove it? Prove its existence? I'm not sure exactly what he's got in mind. And so let's clarify some issues here. First of all, these are the notions that people have of what a hypothesis is. This is what people are brainwashed in high school. Typically, some go as far as college. And this is what the notions people have in their heads of what a hypothesis is. These are examples, okay? First one is objective state the purpose of a hypothesis upon which the project is based. All these are from official sites, okay? A hypothesis is your question in statement form. Hypotheses are single tentative guesses or good hunches. So we have a purpose, we have question, we have guesses, hunches, like, prediction, because they're going to assume for use of devising a theory or planning an experiment. So they're talking about some kind of prediction that you're going to be making. The next one says it's an assumption. The other one says it's an explanation with some evidence and testing behind it. All these are the notions we have of the word hypothesis, or that the mathematicians have, right? Out there in ordinary speech and mathematics. Any physical theory. A hypothesis is a theory is a hypothesis. They're synonym. And it's always provisional. So if it's provisional, it's a hypothesis. But a theory, I guess, is when it's not provisional anymore, when it's, I guess, accepted. Everybody votes and says, okay, now we turn the hypothesis, we morph the hypothesis into a theory. A tentative theory about the natural world. Again, it's a tentative theory. And then data analysis, says another fellow. So these are all the notions people have of what a hypothesis is. And of course, nobody has any idea what a hypothesis is because they have 100 notions for what it is. So we need to define what a hypothesis is. And this fellow didn't do that. Obviously, he says, oh, how do you test a hypothesis? Can we test Bill's hypothesis? And he's that I'm skipping testing the hypothesis. Yeah, because he's got all these notions, and I don't know which one he's got in his tiny brain, So, of course, unless we can pick his brain, we won't know exactly what he means by, or what he understands by a hypothesis. Okay, so let's summarize here. These are these notions: an objective or purpose, an investigative proposal or question, a prediction or testable statement, an assumption or guess, an explanation, a theory, and data analysis. How do you like that for a definition? Huh? So are all these synonyms? Do all these notions that you see there for the word hypothesis, are all the same? And I would think not. If I had to bet, I would say no. If I take this to the ETs, to the Klingons on the other side of the universe, and I give them all these notions, they say, well, what do you mean by a hypothesis, Bill? That's what they would tell me. They would tell me to, go somewhere else. You know what I mean? Okay, so here's the rational version of what a hypothesis is. Okay, it's an assumption. And assumptions include three things: the objects that you're going to use, the definitions you're going to use, a key definition, the ones that you're going to need for your theory, the explanation that is founded upon these assumptions, and a statement of the facts. Not the facts, but the statement of the facts. Mother Nature knows the facts. God knows the facts. The devil knows the facts, and so does Father Universe. All these guys, they know the facts. They know what happened. They're out there. They know everything. They know all the past, exactly how it happened. Every single frame of the Universal movie is filed in a cabinet. They have access to that cabinet. They know exactly what happened. We humans, we petty humans, we little ants, we don't. We don't know what happened exactly. You were there and you saw how this guy killed someone else. You say, I saw it, it's a fact. Well, you probably know it's a fact. Your notion matches Father, Universe, God, and all these other fellows. But now you got to tell me about it. You got to tell your neighbor about it. And he's got to believe in your word. He wasn't there. He didn't see the killing. So you say, no, Joey killed Johnny. You say, well, maybe you were on drugs that day. Maybe you were drunk. Maybe you killed him and want to blame him. You know, there's all sorts of variations there. And so the rest of the world will not agree with you. They don't know what the facts are. So all you can do is give them the statement of the facts according to your version. The defense attorney and the prosecutor don't always agree on the facts. So each one gives a statement of the facts, or what they think the facts are. Okay, and that's different than the actual facts, or what actually happened. Okay, so there's a difference. So we don't talk about the facts, we talk about a statement of the facts. Statement of the facts means this is your version of the facts. Doesn't mean that the other side's going to agree completely with you. Some people have it as a fact that God exists. Other people have doubts about that fact. And so you work with those facts, we work with our facts. You know, everybody's got his own facts, so we call them statement of the facts. Some guy begins his presentation saying, let us assume that God exists. And the other guy says, well, let us assume that God does not exist. So each one works with different facts. We call those statement of the facts. Okay, so a hypothesis sets the stage for the explanation that follows, founded upon it, and which is called the theory. Okay? Theory is an explanation. Hypothesis is an assumption. We don't test assumptions. Okay? And here it is. Well, let me put it over here. Okay, this is the, oh, sorry, got the wrong one. Let me get rid of this. Here's how you test a hypothesis. In science, we don't test assumptions. Okay? Why? Because, in fact, we don't test anything. You know, there's no testing. Why? Because testing is experiment. We don't do experiments in science. Let me say that again. People say, you misspoke, Bill. You said that we don't do experiments in science. Exactly. We don't do experiments in science. The only purpose of experiments is to collect evidence, and the only purpose of evidence is to prove, meaning that you're going to convince, persuade, recruit people. That's the only purpose of doing an experiment, like to show someone something. You're just trying to convince them. We don't do convincing in science. In science, we only explain objectively so the person understands, then he can reach his own conclusions. You can introduce evidence if you want, but that part is religion. That's the one where we try to persuade the guy to believe like we do. Okay, so there's a difference there. One thing is to just state the theory, the explanation, put it out there so that the person understands a mechanism. Then the other thing is to persuade him, say, look, I've got evidence that I'm right. That's religion. That's what mathematical physics does. They work a lot on religion, very little on explanation. In fact, not at all. Because all their explanations for invisible, intangible mediators of phenomena, right, are all without exception, irrational. Not even, they don't even qualify for religion, or like they say, it's not even wrong. Okay, so yeah, religious belief, opinion, knowledge, and that's what testing is all about. Okay, you test what? To test, to try to bring evidence. And why are you bringing evidence? Well, because you want to convince someone. Okay. So it's irrational to test existence, right? In science, we define existence. So you cannot say, Bill, prove to me. You'll test your hypothesis, meaning prove to me that the rope exists. Okay? And so this is the question for this fellow, if that's what he's got going through his mind. How do you test? How do you experiment? See, touch, hands, eyes, see, touch. You're going to the lab, you're going to run an experiment, you're going to test. How do you test that which is invisible and intangible? Okay? We can't see it, we can't touch it, but you want to go to the lab and test something, run some kind of experiment to prove its existence. And all you needed to do for existence is define the word exist, as we do, which is shape, that which has shape, an object, right? That has location, okay? So here you want to test the hypothesis that God exists out there. So how do we test it? I mean, God apparently is invisible and untouchable, right? So how do we test that? Do we bring God into a room and see if we can see him and touch him? The ghost, the spirit, whatever you want to call it? Or do we define the word exist and say, look, if God is an object, he already has partly qualified for existence, but in addition, he has to have a location. There's got to be distance between my chest and his. Now you have a definition that you can use consistently, and you can say, look, let us assume God exists. Oh, what do you mean by that? Well, I mean that God is an object, and he has location within the universe, meaning there's separation between my chest and his. Now we can follow your presentation because we understand what you're saying. But if you say, oh, God exists, I assume that God exists. Well, what did you mean by that? Did you mean you're going to run a test in the lab and see if you can see and touch him? Is that what you meant? So again, all you need to do is define the word exist, and then the rope exists if it has physical presence. If it's an object, and it does qualify as an object, I hope you see an object here. And then if it has location, if it has distance with respect to other ropes and other atoms out there. And if it does, if there's separation there, then it exists by definition. And so we make the assumption, in order to understand the theory that follows, founded upon it, that the rope exists, meaning it's an object and it has location. We're done. Okay? So there's nothing to test. I'm not going to go to the lab and see if I can touch the rope, if I can see the rope, because it's not going to work. I'm telling you it's invisible and intangible. And you say, then it's not an object. No, an object is not that which you can see or touch. An object is that which has shape. The object already had shape before you came into the room. The moon already had shape before we were born. It was an object by definition because it had shape. Energy is not an object. Field is not an object. Wave is not an object. Those do not have shape. Okay, standalone shapes. Field is a dynamic concept. Energy is a dynamic concept. Mass is a dynamic concept. Plasma is a dynamic concept. So is electricity, and all those words used by so many people out there who call themselves physicists. So that's where the problem is. Okay, you don't go in there and say, well, I'm going to prove the existence of energy. What are you going to do? See and touch energy? Is that what you're going to do? No. If it has shape, then it's an object by definition. And you don't need to prove its existence. All you do is say, look, I'm going to define the word exist. And by definition, energy exists because it's a physical object and it has shape and it has location. Then you can talk about the existence of energy. And also that you can talk about energy being an object, a thing. If you cannot show me, if you cannot draw energy for me, show me a picture of energy standalone, and say this is energy and point to it, you cannot even talk about the existence of energy because you still don't have an object, which is one of the requirements for it to have existence. Okay, so let's go to the questions that people had today since last time. Questions, comments, okay? Here's the first one. Fellow says, sound waves have shapes. Magnetic fields have shapes. Energies have shape. Well, All I can say to this fellow is don't just state that. Do something a little more productive. Point to a site on the internet. You can upload it yourself. It doesn't matter. You can do it either way. You can upload your own images, or you can point to an image on the internet where we can see what you're talking about. How is sound waves, right? A wave having shape. Magnetic field has shape. Energy has shape. Show us a picture, an image. When I look up these words, I don't see any images. And the images, like in the case of waves, I see a bunch of vectors. Those are not images of physical things. Okay, vector is a number with direction, supposedly. Magnetic field, again, Mr. James Maxwell, he said it's matter in motion inside a field. So you got to show us that matter portion. That's what you got to show us, not the field. Field is a dynamic concept. Something is moving in there. And if you don't know that, well, you got to read Maxwell. Okay, you probably never read him. But he says matter in motion. That's what a field is. So it's like saying that it's a jumping kangaroo, as I like to say. Jumping kangaroo is not an object. A kangaroo is an object. You have to identify the kangaroo here and tell me what is it that is motion. What is that matter that is moving inside a field? Okay, and you can see that when a magnet attracts another one underwater, attracts the iron filings one at a time. And so something is moving in there, just sweeping them up. Okay, so it's very easy to show that. Okay, so you got some homework there, guy. All you got to do is, show us pictures of what you say have shape. I mean, don't say it. Show us. Very simple. Now the fellow says, physics describes the effects mathematically. It doesn't explain the causes, the mechanism, and never will. Aha. Well, the problem here is that this fellow is confusing physics with mathematical physics, which ain't physics. Okay, here it is. Math phys doesn't explain. Okay, math phys can only describe. Okay, but we're talking about mathematical physics, not about physics. Physics and mathematical physics are two different things. Mathematical physics is not even a religion. It's not even wrong. Okay, because mathematical physics only has irrational explanations. Math phys only describes and does it mathematically, meaning quantitatively, right? And mathematical physicists provide the most irrational explanation they can come up with to simple phenomena, to explain simple phenomena. Like, magnetism. Oh man, you should see that. Talking about electrons spinning around, gravity, warping of space-time. They have all this nonsense out there. Particles at two places at once. It's all garbage. Everything coming out of mathematical physics is just garbage as far as an explanation is concerned. That's why they say, we don't explain. Of course they don't explain. They don't explain because mathematics has no power to explain. But physics is explanation, only explanation. Physics, rational explanations for causes and mechanisms. That's what physics is. What is it that people want to know? What do they want to understand? And they say, well, I wish I could know, I wish I could understand how gravity works. And let me show you how difficult this question is. Here's my famous experiment. You take a pencil, okay? Take a pencil, you let go of it, and it falls down. And you do it a million times, it always falls down unless there's some other thing going on, right? It never goes to the ceiling, always goes to the floor. And you say, oh, it's so breathtaking. I cannot imagine how that works. And in 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years, nobody has figured it out. And all they needed to do all these centuries is figure out what invisible objects are pulling or pushing this pencil downwards. Something is pushing from above, something is pulling from below. One of those two has to be. If you say that there's nothing there because you can't see or touch what's below or above it, you're explaining this with black magic. You're saying nothing comes in contact with the skin of the pen simply because you can't see or touch it. And despite that nothing comes in contact with it, action at a distance, this thing falls downwards, always. Mother Nature's not that irrational. In fact, if I told you that I pull on the donkey with a rope, you would say, that's kid stuff. I understand that. You know, you pull on the rope that's tied to the neck of the donkey. Of course, you pull and donkey comes over. It's no mystery. Only because you can see the rope. But if I go like this, go through the motions, and the donkey comes towards me, you say, oh, how did he do that? That's black magic. Because he's got no mediator, and he's pulling on the donkey from far away. That's called black magic. No, there had better be a rope there, an invisible, intangible rope there. You cannot see or touch it, but I can't be pulling on the donkey with nothing, and the donkey comes towards me, you know. That's called black magic, if I can do that. And Mother Nature is not a witch. She doesn't do black magic. She works with invisible, intangible mediators for all those kinds of phenomena. And until you get that through your thick skull, you won't understand how this universe works. The universe works with invisible, intangible mediators because an object is not that which you can see or touch. It's that which has shape. It has shape, but you cannot see or touch it. And that's where people have a lot of problems with that. Oh, I can't deal with that. Yeah, because every day we think that objects are those things that we can see or touch. Not the mediators Mother Nature uses to do her fantastic workings of the universe. Okay? Okay, and we finally have another fellow. That's what was funny. And he talks about the law of identity, which is that one at the bottom, A equals A. Man, they broke their heads doing this. All these philosophers, you know, A equals A. He says, the bare minimum you need for any coherent expression is the law of identity. Any rational philosophy starts with that, okay? Yet you appear to decry the simplest of rules. I'm breaking all the rules, all the laws of physics, I guess, or the laws of philosophy or whatever. How can you critique anyone's science, anyone's philosophy without utilizing the basic law of identity? And there's the law of identity. They broke their heads on this. They think it's one of the pillars of philosophy, of logic. A equals A. Now you know why where we're at today, because these people are dealing with four-dimensional, four-number-lined space-time. They say time can be bent, and that's gravity. Two particles at the same time in different places, and because A equals A. Okay, with that, I'll see you next Sunday. We'll see.